Commuting to school was hellish for Sungwoo, who often arrived on campus exhausted after transferring 3 times, enduring 2-hour trips each way. He tried to avoid his 9:30 a.m. class since it was a required course for his major, but that was impossible. Getting off the shuttle bus, Sungwoo grumbled about the ordeal of attending school and considered choosing between living near campus or dropping out. Hanho Lee, a year younger, teased him about being weak despite Sungwoo's past as a retired squad commander of the Army Special Forces. Hanho mocked Sungwoo's claim of marching 10 kilometers quickly in full gear, questioning why he couldn't endure 2 hours on the bus or subway. Sungwoo tapped Hanho on the shoulder, telling him to stop preaching until he joined the army himself, asking how long he planned to delay it. Hanho replied with a strong ambition about the unification coin prevailing. Sungwoo clicked his tongue, sarcastically reminding Hanho that he had delayed joining the army because of Myeong and doubted unification would come true after their breakup. Hanho's face hardened, asking Sungwoo not to mention her. Sungwoo reminded him of their freshman welcoming ceremony 3 years ago, where he had declared no campus couples should exist. Hanho remained silent, unable to win the argument as a campus couple member with no military experience. As they headed toward the campus building for the first class, Sungwoo kept mentioning Myeong's name, and Hanho suddenly stared blankly at the sky. Sungwoo asked if he was crying, but Hanho said he was just looking at the sky. Sungwoo joked that Hanho might be conjuring up her face there. Hanho insisted he had seen letters in the sky moments ago, describing them as saying, "monster downloading," reaching 99% before disappearing at 100%, above the library building. Sungwoo looked up but saw only a clear blue sky with a few birds fluttering away. He teased Hanho about playing games last night and confusing reality with dreams. Hanho insisted he was serious, but Sungwoo suggested he was hallucinating due to drinking too much lately. Hanho agreed but glanced at the sky several times uneasily. Sungwoo clicked his tongue and walked on, while Hanho slapped his face a couple of times and caught up, asking Sungwoo to get him coffee from a vending machine because he felt like he was losing his mind. Sungwoo refused, pointing out the long line before the vending machine and the imminent arrival of Professor Huang. He warned Hanho not to swap his grade for coffee. Hanho warned Sungwoo not to doze off again, challenging his strong mentality as a former Special Forces member. Hanho stopped himself, realizing he might get in trouble if he spoke further. They parted ways, with Hanho insisting he really saw the letters. Sungwoo dismissed it as nonsense and headed to the 4th-floor lecture hall. The professor arrived on time, but Sungwoo felt sleepy and struggled to concentrate, blaming his stiff shoulders on the exhausting commute. Suddenly, strange letters floated in the air before him. "What is the best job in the ruined world? Choose right now." Thinking he was hallucinating, he rubbed his eyes, but the hologram remained. The monitor printing class material flickered, then all fluorescent lights went out. Darkness enveloped the room as if the sun had vanished or they were thrown into space. Sungwoo curled up defensively, noticing even his mobile phone was off. Students realized they could see only themselves, yet the holographic message remained visible to all. "You have only 15 seconds left." Confused, the students asked what the countdown meant. A bright light shone, and 10 cards began spinning like a wheel or conveyor belt sushi, moving close enough to touch but quickly moving away clockwise. The cards displayed various pictures with colored backgrounds. Students warned each other not to touch the cards, sensing danger without knowing why. Sungwoo doubted an action was safer, wondering what would happen after 15 seconds. The countdown continued. "You've got only 10 seconds? The cards depicted a fighter with sword and shield, a wizard with a cane, an archer with an arrow, each with a star on a white background. Another card showed a priest with 2 stars on a green background, and another a castle knight with 3 stars on a pink background. Sungwoo struggled to understand the situation as 7 seconds remained. He questioned if it was like poker and what he was supposed to decide so quickly. Suddenly, one distant fighter card disappeared with a poof, and a sword dropped onto the desk of Sungwoo's friend sitting in front of him. He wondered if the fighter on the card had dropped it. With only 5 seconds left, Sungwoo recalled a reminder that choosing a good card was necessary to survive in the ruined world. Sungwoo unconsciously reached out and picked up the card with the most stars, despite having no rational reason for his choice. The card had a black background and depicted a man in a white robe holding a long sickle. A message appeared. You chose an occupation card. Necromancer. Sungwoo questioned the meaning of necromancer, recalling it as a wizard who controls skeletons or corpses in fantasy worlds. Another message followed. Your first occupation selection window has now closed. Those who failed to choose one, please wait for the next chance. The card selection ended, and all messages vanished. The lecture hall brightened as the electricity returned. The student sitting in front of Sungwoo gently lifted the sword that had dropped onto his desk, the blade flashing under the fluorescent lights. The room fell silent, eyes fixed on the sword with embarrassed confusion. Students whispered questions about what had happened, expressing fear and disbelief. The professor stared out the window, seemingly distracted by the strange event. Sungwoo remained unsettled by the holographic message about surviving in the ruined world. The student holding the sword explained that it had dropped when he chose the fighter card. Sungwoo looked up at the ceiling, doubting his own choice of necromancer as nothing appeared before him. Suddenly, the back door of the lecture hall slammed open, and a blood-covered man burst in, screaming for the attacker to be removed from him. Blood gushed from his neck, staining his shirt, while a small green-skinned creature clung to his back, brandishing a deadly knife and stabbing him repeatedly. The man staggered, overwhelmed by his wounds. Students screamed and scrambled to flee, pushing desks and creating chaos. The bloody man collapsed, and Sungwoo, watching with dilated pupils, slowly rose from his seat near the back door, careful not to draw the monster's attention. The green creature roared over the man's body, then quickly scanned the room with rolling yellow eyes, searching for its next victim. Students called out to Minsu, the only one holding the sword, urging him to act. They hid behind him, including Sungwoo, who was now closest to the monster. Minsu trembled, clutching the sword but showing no intention of confronting the creature. Sungwoo called his name calmly, but Minsu responded with frustration and refused to help. The monster then charged at Sungwoo, who screamed but chose to stand his ground, recalling the fate of the stabbed man. He delivered a front kick that knocked the roughly 15-kilogram creature down. The monster scrambled to rise, but Sungwoo grabbed his chair, a heavy all-in-one desk, and lifted it with superhuman strength before striking the monster's head. The creature's knife reached toward Sungwoo's nose, but was stopped by the heavy chair. The monster's head broke, its tongue protruding lifelessly, seemingly killed on the spot. A message appeared. You got 10 gold by knocking down the goblin. Sungwoo exhaled sharply and noticed the frightened students watching him. He realized the green monster resembled a low-level goblin from fantasy games. Another message appeared. The dead have become your subordinate under your authority. A list showed goblin skeleton, LV.1, asterisk weapon, dagger asterisk species, goblin asterisk trait, undead. Confused, Sungwoo watched as the students' faces twisted with fear. They shouted warnings, and he turned to see a goblin rising after pushing the desk chair aside. It was a skeleton whose skin and intestines had been destroyed. The skeleton slowly approached Sungwoo and knelt before him. Sungwoo recalled his chosen occupation. Necromancer, the controller of the dead, whose resurrected subordinates obey absolutely. This concept was familiar from fantasy genres. Suddenly, 2 more goblins appeared through the back door. Students screamed as the chaos intensified. Sungwoo glanced between the skeleton and the goblins as a new message appeared. Your subordinates are waiting for your order. Before Sungwoo could command them to fight, the skeleton stood and advanced toward the goblins. The goblins hesitated, sensing a kindred spirit, but the skeleton stabbed its sword into their heads. The skeleton acted in accordance with Sungwoo's intuition, executing his unspoken wishes by anticipating his preferences even without conscious commands. It was now engaged in a deadly battle against the 2 goblins on his behalf. The skeleton pulled a dagger from one of the goblins, though the attack was not fatal, as the dagger had slightly missed its mark. The two goblins then wildly swung their swords at the skeleton, which had been resurrected like them. However, the swords, designed to cut human flesh, failed to harm the skeleton. Despite this, the skeleton's durability was limited. Its right elbow was shattered by the goblin's clumsy strikes, leaving it to defend itself with only its left hand. Sungwoo grew nervous watching the fight, realizing that if he did not intervene, he would have to face the goblins himself again. Although a single goblin was not a formidable opponent due to its small, childlike build, fighting several at once would be challenging. He resolved to prevent that possibility. Sungwoo glanced at Minsu, who stood awkwardly gripping a sword with both hands, showing no sign of resolve. Sungwoo demanded that Minsu hand over the sword immediately, insisting he needed it to kill the goblins. Minsu refused, claiming the sword as his own since he had selected it from a card. Sungwoo was dumbfounded by Minsu's selfishness in such a dire situation. Frustrated, Sungwoo told Minsu to go out and fight them himself. Minsu's face turned pale, revealing his unwillingness. Sungwoo decided against forcing the issue, knowing from his experience as a retired sergeant that confronting a timid person acting like an advisor would only cause more trouble. Sungwoo then told Minsu to peel potatoes with the sword if he wasn't going to use it. In response, Sungwoo lifted a desk along with a chair. The skeleton, now functional only with its left hand, stepped aside as if anticipating Sungwoo's move. Sungwoo threw the desk at the goblins, knocking them to the floor. Seizing the opportunity, the skeleton lunged and skillfully stabbed its sword into their necks and bellies. Two messages appeared simultaneously. "You've earned 10 gold by hunting a goblin." The skeleton had killed both goblins, and the lecture hall became a sea of blood. The one-armed skeleton then waddled towards Sungwoo and looked up at him blankly, like a puppy seeking praise. Sungwoo, feeling uneasy despite their alliance, asked the skeleton to look elsewhere. The skeleton bowed its head in response. Unsure if it was disappointed, Sungwoo tried to read its hollow eyes but realized that without eyes, he could not discern its feelings. A message appeared. The dead have become subordinates under your authority. A list showed 3 subordinates. Goblin Skeleton, LV.1, Goblin Skeleton, LV.1, Goblin Skeleton, LV.1. The maximum number of subordinates had been reached. The 2 goblins were resurrected as skeletons and gathered around Sungwoo with a clattering noise, bringing the total number of skeletons following him to 3. The middle-aged professor, shocked by the absurd situation but noticing Sungwoo's sobriety, asked what had happened. Sungwoo admitted he had no idea but was focused on the noise around him. He turned to look outside the window, hearing screams and shrieks filling the campus. A female student shouted that she couldn't reach the police station by mobile phone, confirming that all lines were busy. Some frightened students began opening the front door and running out, shouting to leave the campus and find their cars. Sungwoo judged their haste premature. At the end of the hallway, the students saw the little monsters screaming and wailing. The skeletons suddenly ran toward the back door without any orders, as if reflecting Sungwoo's subconscious will. The 3 skeletons kicked the 2 goblins aside as they charged at the students. In the hallway, the goblins and skeletons tangled and fought fiercely, pushing and shoving. The skeletons began to crack under the strain, lacking muscles and weighing less than the goblins. The students scattered in confusion, heading toward the opposite hallway. Sungwoo acknowledged that scattering was not always wise, but confining frightened people was impossible and he had no obligation to protect them. He accepted their right to choose and agonized over his own options. Despite the uncertainty, he resolved to follow the game's rules. He recognized that his occupation, abilities, and the monster's appearance were part of the game. He reasoned that fighting might increase his chances of survival, so he chose to fight instead of flee, confident because he had subordinates to fight for him. Had he received a sword by choosing the fighter card, he would not have made this choice. Sungwoo watched the bloody fight between the skeletons and goblins. They grappled and stabbed each other without particular skill, making the battle intense. Suddenly, one skeleton's neck was smashed, and its skull rolled to its feet. A message appeared. Your subordinate will now go back to its eternal death. Sungwoo pleaded silently for the remaining skeletons to defeat the goblins. Sungwoo gulped anxiously as he watched the dogfight between the goblin skeletons and living goblins. Their performances seemed nearly equal, but numerically the skeletons held the advantage. Though one skeleton fell, the two goblins were already broken into pieces. A message appeared. You have earned 10 gold by hunting the goblin. This repeated twice. Sungwoo shouted a reluctant cheer. Then another message signaled progress. You have leveled up. LV.2. At the mention of leveling up, Sungwoo realized he was entering the real game. He quietly recited this to himself, confirming his earlier prediction that fighting would make him stronger. When he said, "Status bar," a holographic window appeared before his eyes displaying his player profile. Name: Sungwoo Yu. Level: 2. Occupation: Necromancer. Capability: Muscle power, 5. Agility, 5. Physical strength, 5. Earned gold, 50. He noticed there were no new stats upon leveling up and wondered if stats were awarded at all. His question was answered when a system window popped up offering level-up cards. Stats: Random, Skill, Random, Item, Random, Other, Random, and a confirmed muscle power increase. Sungwoo observed that all cards except the confirmed stat increase were face down, indicating randomness. After some thought, he chose the skill card, number 2, valuing skills as crucial in most games. The message, "The maximum number of subordinates will increase by 1," appeared, and a new skeleton rose from the heap of bodies, bringing the total to 5. A warning flashed. You are almost out of mana. Sungwoo realized summoning skeletons required mana and saw a gauge. Mana 3/30, which then increased to 4. He joked aloud about the skeleton's obedience, and 4 goblins simultaneously looked up at him. Sungwoo told them to look down instead, and they complied. After the tough battle, Sungwoo found himself alone with 4 skeletons. Leaning his head against the cold iron gate, he tried to cool down but felt heartburn from prolonged alertness. He reminded himself to stay vigilant to survive, recalling his recent army experience where quick adaptation determined survival chances. He resolved to focus solely on surviving. Hearing strange screams echoing down the hallway, Sungwoo patted his cheeks and took 3 deep breaths, then prepared to move on. The lecture hall was on the 4th floor of the Humanity and Social Sciences building. Sungwoo looked out the window at the cafe streets below, littered with bodies and dozens of screeching goblins running around. Feeling safer inside, he hesitated to go down but knew he could not stay forever. With the skeletons leading, he cautiously descended 1 floor. Suddenly, a figure wielding a dagger emerged from the 3rd floor, stunned. The dagger sliced through one skeleton's skull, killing it instantly. Sungwoo recognized the figure as Hanho and felt relief at the familiar face, though Hanho remained alert. Hanho asked what the skeletons were, and Sungwoo described them as his bodyguards. After some hesitation, Sungwoo asked if Hanho had also chosen an occupation card. Hanho confirmed he had, selecting a thief card with 1 star. He believed 1 star was good, like a brigadier general, but Sungwoo sighed, knowing Hanho was a bit naive. Sungwoo suggested they head to a safe place, assuring Hanho they would be protected by the skeletons leading the way. The skeletons rattled as they descended the stairs, followed by Sungwoo and Hanho. Upon reaching the 2nd floor, a message appeared. Your team fights will have the synergy effect from now on. A synergy list showed Dagger Thief Group, 1st Stage, Class, Weapon Synergy, Condition, 5 daggers loaded, Effect, Probability of Fatality, plus 10%, Gold Accumulation, plus 10%. Hanho and Sungwoo both noticed the synergy message. It indicated that gathering similar patterns granted buffs, enhancing teamwork benefits. Sungwoo wondered if this synergy applied to the skeletons, which were not human, but noted 4 of the daggers creating the synergy were held by the skeletons. He concluded the skeletons were useful, allowing him to simulate a team effect even when moving alone, and felt confident in his choice. Suddenly, a group of 7 goblins appeared, ascending from the 1st floor stairs. One goblin was twice the size of the others, wearing Buddhist prayer beads and wielding a long spear. Manhwa recognized the large goblin as their chief and stepped back. Sungwoo prepared to flee, realizing they could not defeat 7 goblins. Then a system message appeared. The gang of goblins is now weakened after smelling the smell of death, first stage. Stats have decreased by 30%. This occurs when they run into more than 4 skeletons. The goblins hesitated, then retreated, their anger replaced by fear. Sungwoo remarked on their luck as the 4 skeletons began to rattle down the stairs. The skeletons charged toward the goblins without hesitation, rattling loudly as they stormed the group. Squeaks echoed as the battle resumed. The goblins affected by the smell of death reacted sluggishly, as if frozen in place. The skeletons caught up and stabbed their daggers into the goblins. One goblin rolled off the stairs after being pushed by a stab. Manhwa, who had been ready to flee, admired the fierce fight. The bulky goblin chief suddenly lifted its left hand, and the bracelet on its forearm began to glow ominously. A system message appeared. The chief of the goblin group has initiated the madness of the wildness. Its minions are now strengthened. The goblins' eyes glowed red, and their movements became more agile as they pushed the skeletons back up the stairs. Manhwa nervously suggested running away, but Sungwoo insisted on waiting, knowing that if the skeletons were destroyed, they would be doomed. Sungwoo focused on controlling the skeletons, which were supposed to follow his commands. He noticed the chief goblin spinning its glowing bracelet and formulated a plan. The first created skeleton, missing one hand but agile, jumped onto its allies' backs and launched a sudden attack, stabbing the chief goblin's left wrist and cutting off the red energy from the bracelet. The goblin's fear returned instantly. The chief goblin, stunned, kicked the skeleton down the stairs, but the skeleton's attack had already turned the tide. System messages confirmed the rewards. You have earned 10 + 1 gold by hunting the goblin. The skeletons attacked relentlessly and emotionlessly, stabbing the goblins with deadly precision. Yellow sparkles accompanied the impact sounds, indicating the synergy effect of Dagger Thief Gang. 5. More system messages confirmed repeated gold rewards as 6 of the 7 goblins collapsed in blood on the stairs. Only the chief goblin remained, wielding a long spear and smashing one skeleton. But 2 skeletons circled and stabbed it relentlessly until it fell moaning in a pool of blood. A system message declared, You have earned 50 + 5 by hunting the chief goblin. Manhwa laughed nervously as Sungwoo descended the bloodied stairs to inspect the chief goblin's body. Manhwa asked if Sungwoo would receive items from the kill, and Sungwoo confirmed this was common. Gold sparkled on the chief goblin's severed left forearm and the spear beside it. Sungwoo claimed the items. The crude spear's description revealed it to be a general-grade one-handed spear that increased the attack speed of small-build, friendly forces by 20%. Sungwoo equipped the bracelet on his left wrist, immediately activating the item's effect. The attack speed of Goblin Skeleton has increased, +20%. Another system message appeared. You can use the buff skill because the conditions have been met. Asterisk activation condition. Goblin Mercenaries. The skill, Madness of the Wilderness, was a grade debuff that increased Goblin Mercenaries' attacks by 10% and attack speed by 20% for 10 minutes, with a 1-hour cooldown. Sungwoo noted he had obtained a valuable weapon, recalling how the Goblin Gang had grown stronger when the chief used it. The one-armed skeleton that had cut the chief's wrist waddled up the stairs, battered but more refined. Sungwoo patted its skull in approval, but quickly withdrew his hand, still uneasy. The skeleton gnawed its teeth loudly in satisfaction. Sungwoo ordered it to stop, and the skeleton opened its jaws wide, looking ugly. Manhwa asked where they should go next, and Sungwoo suggested leaving immediately. They descended to the first floor and headed for the lobby, where a crowd had gathered in front of the main gate. Sungwoo instructed the skeletons to enter the copy room, warning that their appearance might frighten people. Manhwa admitted he had struck the skeletons on the head in panic, fearing they were monsters. Sungwoo opened the copy room door, and the skeletons filed inside. The room was rarely used, so no one was likely to disturb them. About 30 people were gathered in the lobby, but only 5 carried weapons, indicating few could act if the strange cards appeared again. A man wearing a student council jumper shouted for everyone to come down, explaining they were contacting the police and that student council members were investigating. A female student, on the verge of tears, urged them to break open the door. The student council executive replied that they had tried repeatedly but the door would not break. The main door was an ordinary glass door, but the executive member shook his head resolutely when asked if it could be broken. The man in the student council jumper instructed everyone to calm down and lower their voices to avoid attracting the monsters, urging them to follow his instructions. Sungwoo naturally mingled with the group. One of the student council executives, Jin-sok Lee, pretended to recognize Sungwoo. Sungwoo also recognized Jin-sok as a senior from the same department, recalling unpleasant memories of him from a past department outing. Jin-sok was known for his strict adherence to hierarchy and for hitting on girls in the department. He had joined the student council to gain status. Jin-sok greeted Sungwoo formally, who then cautiously approached the main door, curious why it could not be opened. Jin-sok suddenly shouted at Sungwoo not to approach the door, calling it dangerous and waving him away. Sungwoo stepped back as Jin-sok sighed and then adopted a saintly expression, apologizing for his edge of mind due to his responsibility to protect the students. Jin-sok asked Sungwoo if he had chosen a card, and Sungwoo confirmed that both he and Hanho had done so. Jin-sok greeted Hanho, recalling seeing him at a previous event but complaining about being too busy to attend classes often. He urged them to help protect the students if they had weapons. Sungwoo and Hanho agreed. Jin-sok scrutinized Sungwoo's crude spear with contempt and questioned whether he could be of help. Sungwoo thought his weapon was inferior compared to others, but kept his real weapons stored away in the copy room. Jin-sok boasted about having caught a green monster called a goblin and proudly displayed his 2-star shield fighter card, telling them to hide behind him if needed. Sungwoo responded half-heartedly. Suddenly, Minsu arrived, panting and reporting faint goblin noises on the stairs. Jin-sok patted Minsu on the shoulder appreciatively and strode arrogantly toward the group, commanding everyone to come down quietly and hide inside the cafe while the student council members guarded the entrance. The mention of goblins chilled the group, and they began to shuffle into the cafe. Sungwoo and Hanho approached the main entrance, avoiding Jinsok's gaze. Hanho pointed out a holographic pink chain icon on the doorknob, signaling a magical seal that would only open if the building's boss monster was attacked within a time limit of 2 hours and 11 minutes. Sungwoo tried to pull the door, but it would not budge. Sungwoo speculated that if they failed to kill the monsters within the time frame, the monsters would grow stronger. He warned that no one would come to rescue them, and anyone who fell asleep would be the first to die. They approached Jin-sok again. Jin-sok confirmed that Sungwoo and Minsu knew each other, and noted they were both from the class of 2015. Minsu responded coldly, still offended from a previous encounter. Jin-sok expressed confidence that having both of them under his authority made him feel secure and urged them to stay alert and endure, patting all 3 men on the shoulder as if he were a general burning bridges behind him. Sungwoo questioned whether they were expected to stay put. Jin-sok insisted they had to wait for rescue because they could not leave. Sungwoo challenged the notion of a rescue team arriving, pointing out that if similar incidents were happening nationwide, the police could not respond. Jin-sok insisted the army would come to free them, but Sungwoo recognized this as wishful thinking and realized it was too complacent to stay still when the outcome in 2 hours was uncertain. Sungwoo sighed silently, which angered Jin-sok, who ordered him to stay out of it and stand still if he wanted to survive. Suddenly, Minsu stepped back, shouting that goblins were approaching. About 8 goblins ran down the central stairs. The group stood up in alarm, trapped since the cafe had only one entrance. Jin-sok raised his shield with trembling hands and called for anyone with weapons to the entrance to stop the goblins. Minsu then yelled that goblins were also coming from the hallway. Jin-sok cursed in frustration as the goblins, resembling scrawny skeletons, advanced. Sungwoo whispered that the creatures were not evil. Jin-sok asked him to repeat himself. Sungwoo stood firmly at the cafe entrance. In the cafe, Sungwoo addressed Jin-sok firmly, warning him that a misguided sense of responsibility could lead to others' deaths if someone foolish tried to act like a commander. Jin-sok, shocked, demanded Sungwoo's occupation, to which Sungwoo replied vaguely, then left the cafe. The 8 goblins froze in place, seemingly terrified, before screaming and retreating. The necromancer's smell of death emanated from Sungwoo, frightening the goblins, though to Jin-sok and the others, it was Sungwoo's presence that appeared menacing. Soon the hunting began. Outside the cafe, the clattering of bones echoed ominously as 4 skeletons ruthlessly slaughtered the 8 goblins. Those trapped inside watched silently through the glass, faces frozen in disbelief. Jin-sok, gripping his shield, trembled at the brutal scene, having thought his death was imminent when the goblins first appeared and even considered fleeing. Sungwoo advanced, wielding a crude spear, killing goblins while escorted by the skeletons. Sungwoo ordered the one-armed skeleton to block the stairs to prevent the goblins' escape. The skeleton promptly positioned itself at the first step. Sungwoo's loud commands were meant to reassure the onlookers that the skeletons were under his control and that he was the one managing the crisis. He intended to kill the boss monster within the allotted time and escape, believing it to be the safest strategy. One goblin fell to a critical strike from Sungwoo's spear, aided by his attack speed buff. He analyzed his current buffs. Synergy with the Dagger Thieves gang granting a 10% critical strike chance and 10% gold accumulation, and the madness of the wilderness item increasing attack speed against goblins by 20%. Sungwoo's decisive actions established him as their guide in this life-or-death moment. Sungwoo gripped his spear, pulled back his shoulder, and threw it with force at the last goblin, piercing its chest. The skeletons remained on guard, but Sungwoo felt the need to improve his combat skills for any unforeseen circumstances. His kill impressed the onlookers, who whispered admiration and gratitude for his presence. After the fight, Sungwoo examined the goblin bodies but found no sparkling items, only crude daggers scattered around. He realized that ordinary goblins did not drop items. Only significant foes like the chief goblin did. A message appeared, announcing that he had earned a roulette ticket for killing 20 monsters and had been upgraded to the Unlimited, rating as the 34th person in history, limited to 100 people. Sungwoo could not immediately understand the ticket's function due to the absence of a typical game inventory, so he decided to remember the item and focus on the present. He praised the bloodied skeletons perfunctorily, warning the one-armed skeleton not to gnash its teeth again. The other skeletons ceased their attempts at mimicry at his command. Suddenly, Jin-sok shouted in frustration. Sungwoo turned toward him as Jin-sok stepped back, astonished, while Minsu fled to the far end of the cafe. Sungwoo reminded Jin-sok that he had helped them, noting Jin-sok's earlier disdain when watching him wield a crude spear. This time, Jin-sok nodded silently in acknowledgement. Sungwoo entered the cafe and surveyed the group of 7 armed individuals, including Hanho, Jin-sok, and Minsu, all eyes fixed on him. He took a breath and fell silent for a moment, employing a military tactic he had often used to heighten tension before delivering an important message. His recent actions had granted him the authority to command their attention. No one spoke during the silence. All awaited Sungwoo's words. Finally, Sungwoo explained that, as the message had indicated, the door would not open or break due to a strange phenomenon. The group asked what they should do and if there was any way to open it. Their demeanor had shifted from fear and complaints to seeking solutions, treating Sungwoo as an expert they could trust. Pointing to the main door, Sungwoo stated that the solution was in the message. They had to catch the boss monster hiding somewhere in the building. Then he pointed upward to the ceiling and informed them that only 2 hours remained to capture the boss monster. The group fell silent once more, absorbing the gravity of their task. One of the men raised his hand and revealed that he had seen the boss monster while smoking on the rooftop, describing it as a very large creature that had killed even his professor. This confirmed the rooftop as their destination. Sungwoo asked for more volunteers to join him, but no one stepped forward despite his encouragement. Those who had chosen occupation cards lowered their heads and concealed their weapons. Hanho expressed a wish to stay behind, but Sungwoo forcibly pulled his arm to make him come along, explaining that Hanho's presence was necessary to provide a buff for the skeletons. The synergy of Dagger Thieves Gang 5 activated when Sungwoo held 5 daggers, including Hanho's. Hanho offered his dagger to Sungwoo, but Sungwoo declined resolutely, leaving Hanho speechless. Sungwoo dismissed her attitude as reckless but acknowledged that forcing anyone unwilling to fight was impossible and unlikely to help. Sungwoo then asked Jinsok if he would join, but Jinsok said he had to stay and protect the students as part of his duty with the student council. Sungwoo accepted this and instructed him to stay alert. Debating whether to use the elevator or stairs, Sungwoo decided on the stairs due to the risk of encountering monsters in the elevator. As he began climbing, 4 skeletons escorted him closely, with Hanho and Jisoo following behind. Jisoo mentioned having killed 2 goblins early in the game. Hanho grumbled about the situation and referenced strange letters he had seen that morning, which Sungwoo acknowledged might be a harbinger, but said there was nothing to change now except the day one might be killed. He warned Hanho that foolish escape attempts would lead to being the first victim, citing Admiral Sunshin Lee's survival wisdom. Suddenly, goblins appeared on the stairs. Sungwoo ordered Hanho and Jisoo to confront them from behind. The skeletons attacked the goblins ruthlessly as 2 goblins charged from the second-floor lecture hall. Hanho struggled with his dagger while Jisoo drew her saber and swiftly killed 2 goblins with a single, precise stroke, then stabbed another charging from the left. Despite her pale face smeared with blood, she wiped it off with her sleeve. Hanho admired her skill. Sungwoo was pulling a spear from a goblin body amid 6 fallen goblins. Hanho acknowledged that those determined to fight risked survival, while those hoping to survive without fighting faced a high chance of death. They secured the second floor and ascended to the third. Sungwoo rushed to him and asked if he was all right. The professor, barely coherent, explained that nearly all his students had been killed because of him. He had initially led them to the research room, then moved them to the rooftop following the contingency manual. He described encountering a more horrible monster there that had killed the students who trusted him. He urged Sungwoo never to go to the rooftop and to survive. After delivering this last message, a new notification appeared before Sungwoo's eyes. Exclusive quest, title, Revenge for the Professor type, Rescue or Neglect the Killed Professor goal. Kill the boss monster inside the building reward. Exclusive skill. A deep sense of guilt would wash over anyone seeing their professor die before their eyes until the last moment. As someone who had held and wielded the reins of death, Sungwoo could seek revenge by killing the enemy or neglecting the death of this ordinary, weak professor. The choice was his. The quest instructions specified that he had to follow the attacking time set in the building and that his choice would affect his fate. Sungwoo wondered if fate meant a decisive turning point, noting that depending on whether he chose to rescue or neglect, his skills would be affected. He did not hesitate. It was not out of pity for the professor but because he had to catch the boss monster anyway. Now he wanted to kill the boss monster even more. He questioned why they had to go through such a cursed ordeal. Sungwoo had been obsessed with adapting to imminent danger and seeking survival, but for the first time, he began to question everything. Before Sungwoo could answer, the skeletons proceeded up the stairs, and the door to the top floor soon appeared. Sungwoo flung it open. He entered the boss monster's room. Sungwoo had never climbed to the rooftop of the Humanities and Social Sciences building, except once when he practiced dancing for the freshman talent show. Now, the rooftop had become a dungeon for goblins. They were busy making a tent from clothes stripped from dead students, using lockers and various objects as walls. The goblins piled thick textbooks here and there and made a fire in a plastic trash bin after ripping the books apart. At one end of the rooftop, goblins were stripping clothes from bodies. Suddenly, Sungwoo felt scared and questioned why he had come here. Yet, other feelings surged within him. Initially calm, thinking the phenomenon was uncontrollable, he grew upset at the rooftop scene and why they had to endure it. However, the more he thought, the more cool-headed he became, knowing he was weak compared to the monsters. They were killed because they were weak, so Sungwoo, Hanho, and Jisoo needed to be strong. At that moment, The goblin tearing a pair of blue jeans with a dagger turned its head toward them and screeched. All the goblins on the rooftop gathered, about 20 in total, blocking the three and showing 6 smiles, perhaps thinking they outnumbered them. Manhwa suggested escaping, but before he finished, the skeletons rushed forward. 4 skeletons stood shoulder to shoulder, blocking the entrance to the rooftop. Sungwoo lifted his left hand, and the red bracelet's Madness of the Wilderness on his wrist activated immediately. The Madness of the Wilderness granted a 10-minute buff. Attack damage increased by 10% and attack speed by 20%. The skeletons' hollow eyes sparkled brightly, and their hands were empowered with energy spirits. The goblins charged like a herd of angry wild dogs, but the skeletons resisted firmly, blocking attacks with their left forearms and stabbing deeply with their daggers. Sungwoo observed their attack speed was very fast. The skeletons fought back with double the force, piercing through goblins' swords and knucklebones, causing instant deaths. The first 4 goblins at the forefront fell in 3 seconds. Sungwoo shouted to think of the skeletons as their shield and heaved his spear over their skulls. The 120 centimeters tall skeletons served as a barricade, allowing Sungwoo and the others to attack the goblins safely outside their range. Jisoo wielded her saber over the skeletons, but Manhwa, holding daggers, stood in the back blankly. Manhwa cursed, complaining that the goblins swarmed like maggots. He picked up 2 daggers but found them useless. In desperation, Manhwa threw 1 dagger at a goblin in the rear, hitting its forehead and causing it to fall immediately. Encouraged, Manhwa threw another dagger, hitting a second goblin's forehead easily. He declared he had found his talent. As the 3 attacked fiercely behind the skeleton shield, the goblins hesitated, their fighting spirit broken. The smell of death curse activated, reducing the goblins' stats by 30%. It had been restricted when their morale was high but showed its effects when they lost hope. The skeletons advanced with their attack, forcing the goblins to step back and disperse. The goblins were defeated. Suddenly, a shadow moved behind the makeshift wall of lockers. Something large began walking out with long strides. The retreating goblins shouted in worship and fear. It was a goblin but larger and respected by the others. About 170 centimeters tall, it wore a baseball jumper with the symbol of a hotel business department on its right chest, its muscular body visible beneath the open jumper. Manhwa caught his breath and lifted a dagger, recognizing this as the boss monster. The boss goblin lifted a large stick and roared loudly, prompting the other goblins, who had been frightened moments before, to reposition themselves with murderous expressions. As the smell of death curse lifted instantly, the goblins charged fiercely like religious fanatics. When Sungwoo gave the order to kill them all, the skeletons attacked the goblins, overpowering them easily. Several goblins collapsed upon clashing with the skeletons, though Sungwoo knew they were not the real threat. One of the skeletons was thrown over the railing with a thud. Sungwoo shouted for everyone to move back, but it was too late. An ordinary blow shattered the skeleton into pieces, revealing the skeleton's vulnerability due to their structural build. 2 skeletons were quickly resurrected among the goblin bodies to replace the fallen ones, but one was immediately smashed to pieces by a heavy blow as it stood. Its skull was hurled towards Sungwoo, who narrowly avoided it. It struck the rooftop door and shattered. The goblin bodies, which supplied the material for the skeletons, were scattered everywhere, but resurrecting all of them indefinitely was impossible. Sungwoo's mana had dropped to 20 out of 30. Each skeleton required 5 mana points, allowing only 4 skeletons to be created at that moment. Though mana steadily increased, it was insufficient. Suddenly, something was thrown at the chief goblin, which barely blocked it with its left hand. Manhwa had thrown an old goblin dagger that stabbed into the goblin's forearm but caused no significant damage. Veins bulged on the goblin's forehead, showing it had been hit. Manhwa stepped back, frightened, as the chief goblin charged toward him at full speed, lifting the heavy club with both hands. The goblin's threat made Manhwa scream. At that moment, the skeletons rushed in to block the attack, allowing Manhwa to flee quickly. The chief goblin's strike smashed 3 skeletons instantly. The one-armed skeleton, the sole survivor, had one of its ribs ripped apart by the tip of the club. Unfazed, the skeleton lowered its head and stabbed the dagger into the top of the goblin's foot. The goblin screeched and kicked the skeleton with its other foot, hurling it into a locker across the room. Sungwoo felt heartbroken as he saw the skeleton's skull crack from the impact. He then noticed Jisoo sneaking behind the goblin. She wielded a saber, slashing a long cut across its back. Had the goblin not sensed her attack at the last moment, she could have beheaded it. Jisoo stepped back, smacking her lips and shaking the saber to dust it off. Sungwoo recognized that Jisoo's swordsmanship was far from ordinary. Though she wore a tracksuit and was a graduate of the College of Physical Education, her sword skills displayed something extraordinary. Her constant brandishing of the saber was a strategic move to confuse the chief goblin. He resolved to move strategically as well. The 3 skeletons he resurrected with 15 mana surrounded the boss goblin, maintaining distance to avoid being smashed all at once by the club. Sungwoo intended to use the skeletons as shields to prevent the boss monster from leaping at them. The boss goblin curled up, bleeding profusely, taking a defensive stance after its hasty attack backfired. Sungwoo thought to attack it from behind, and the skeleton behind the goblin moved, though it could not mount a proper ambush due to its gnashing teeth. As the goblin wielded the club, Sungwoo hurled his spear. The timing was good, but the spear barely passed its left ear, breaking its outer ear and causing blood to drip down its shoulder. Enraged, the boss monster charged at the nearby skeleton and swung the club. Sungwoo ordered the skeleton to evade quickly, but the monster was faster. Sungwoo's mana dropped to 3 out of 30 after using the remainder to resurrect another skeleton. Only 3 skeletons remained. The boss goblin looked around, its eyes shifting as it counted the remaining skeletons, then let out a disgusting goblin laugh, believing it had seized the chance to win. Hanho quickly threw a dagger at the monster, but the goblin easily blocked it by raising the club. Sungwoo admonished Hanho for speaking during the attack, explaining that only certain sounds should be made when confident of a kill. Sungwoo scanned the area and found a couple of long swords near an all-in-one desk in the corner, likely belonging to a fallen swordmaster. He approached stealthily, grabbed the 2 swords, and commanded the skeletons to charge. 2 skeletons attacked simultaneously from the left and right, but the goblin brandished the club with a faint smile, smashing them before they could close in. At that moment, a long sword flew over the goblin's head and landed safely in the one-armed skeleton's hand. It waddled while holding the sword, which was as tall as itself. Sungwoo held the other sword in his hand on the opposite side. Thanks to their teamwork, a synergy effect activated. The warrior, first stage. Weapon synergy increased attack speed by 10% and reduced weapon weight by 50%, triggered by equipping 3 swords between Sungwoo, Jisoo, and Hanho. A yellow energy aura appeared on their blades. Additionally, an unexpected individual synergy, one-armed warrior, activated on the skeleton, showing a blue energy aura on its remaining arm and blade. Sungwoo instructed Hanho to remain silent during their attacks, only making sound when certain of a kill. Hanho looked at him strangely while laboriously lifting the all-in-one desk. Sungwoo lifted the desk over his head and charged at the boss goblin, wielding his first weapon that had once killed goblins with a single blow. Jisoo and the one-armed skeleton moved simultaneously. The scene unfolded with the terrible invention of the all-in-one desk becoming a weapon in their desperate battle. The students' past questions and resentment about the all-in-one desk had sparked angry responses around the campus, but only now did Sungwoo truly appreciate its value. He recognized it as the best blunt weapon and shield, having already killed 3 goblins with it. This time, he rushed toward the boss monster, holding the heavy desk over his head. It failed to realize that being stabbed would have been preferable to what came next. As the heavy desk made of strong boards and iron struck its head, the boss monster staggered despite covering its head with its hands. Blood gushed from the wound, soaking the ground beneath its feet. The skeleton tore into the boss monster's flesh like a wolf hunting large prey, while the monster screamed and wildly swung its club into the air. Hanho's dagger landed squarely in its left shoulder, causing the shoulder to drop and leaving the monster completely off guard. Sungwoo silently ordered the one-armed skeleton to sacrifice itself, gripping his sword anew. The skeleton charged boldly at the boss monster, prepared to give its life for victory. The boss monster roared and swung its club toward the skeleton's skull, aiming to crush it and create an opening for Sungwoo and Jisoo to strike simultaneously. However, the skeleton blocked the club with a martial arts-like deflection, activating its one-armed warrior skill with an 88% success rate. When the boss monster retaliated, it staggered and lost balance, allowing the skeleton's sword to stab deeply into its neck. The muscular body collapsed helplessly. Sungwoo and Jisoo paused, surprised that the fight was over. Sungwoo remarked that the skeleton had fought well until the end, and despite being previously killed by the heavy desk, it had returned stronger. A red light began to emit from the skeleton's body. The system notified that the goblin skeleton had been upgraded by absorbing the boss's magical power, drastically increasing its defensive power and adding the commander trait, which granted organic synergy depending on the number of team members. Sungwoo noticed a red pattern inscribed on the skeleton's forehead and questioned the strange tattoo, but the fallen skeleton could not respond. Opening his list of subordinates, he saw the elite goblin skeleton LV.2, with the new commander trait and the potential for new synergies. Hanho and Jisoo announced they had leveled up to level 3 as well. Sungwoo confirmed his own level increase and discussed the random nature of level-up rewards with Jisoo. Hanho stared curiously at the level-up card, seeing the same options as Sungwoo. Sungwoo chose the skill card again, hoping to summon more skeletons, but this time he acquired the basic skill Bone Weapon Formation, which allowed the creation of various weapons from bones, with quality depending on materials and skill grade. Before experimenting with the goblin bones scattered on the floor, another message appeared, congratulating Sungwoo on conquering the exclusive quest for the Revenge of the Dead by hunting the boss monster. The reward was an exclusive skill and a subtle change in fate, along with an increase in the maximum number of subordinates by 1, allowing Sungwoo to control 5 skeletons. Puzzled by the message about fate changing subtly, Sungwoo resolved to be more prudent in future selections. Meanwhile, Hanho and Jisoo chose their level-up cards and received items falling from the air. Hanho received a drab thief hood that increased the probability of hiding from monsters by 50%. Jisoo joked that it looked like a poncho raincoat, perfect for running away, but Hanho declared he no longer ran away, confident in his fighting skills. Sungwoo teased him about fidgeting with his dagger behind monsters. When Sungwoo sarcastically teased Hanho about throwing daggers, Hanho fumed, insisting that throwing daggers was his special talent. Sungwoo retorted that Hanho wasn't doing anything while using skeletons as shields. Hanho defended himself, recalling how he had charged at a monster with a heavy desk over his head, risking his life. Sungwoo accused him of taking credit for his subordinates' efforts, implying Hanho made them work hard and then claimed all the glory. Hanho laughed derisively, covering his mouth, while Sungwoo sighed and pointed at his own face. Hanho blinked, confused, and asked what was wrong. Sungwoo then told the skeletons to kill Hanho. The 5 skeletons simultaneously raised their heads and stared at Hanho's face, their hollow eyes unsettling him. Hanho nervously called out to them, trying to remind them they were friends. Meanwhile, Jisoo cautiously opened the wooden box containing her item. She revealed an ignition stone, which Sungwoo explained could cause a knife to catch fire when sharpened with it. Hanho envied her item as he glanced down at his own and put on his thief hood. Sungwoo, having used all his mana to resurrect the 5 skeletons, decided not to test his new skill, Bone Weapon Formation, basic, yet, suggesting they leave for now. After killing the boss, they descended to the first floor. The lobby on the first floor was silent. Although the main door had opened with the boss's defeat, no one had noticed yet. Jin-sok paced nervously, ostensibly guarding the cafe entrance but ready to flee. At that moment, Minsu emerged from the cafe, looking pale and awkwardly holding a sword. He questioned if it was safe to remain there. Jin-sok frowned, having heard complaints from others inside about regretting not following Sungwoo to fight the boss. People argued they should join Sungwoo even now. Frustrated, Jin-sok swore and expressed anger at those who complained despite his efforts to protect them. Though he had considered fleeing himself, his anger made him decide otherwise. He returned to the cafe and confronted the group angrily, demanding to know why they were complaining. The group was embarrassed by his tone. Jin-sok declared he could no longer risk his life protecting them and told anyone wanting to leave to go ahead. A tall man challenged him, asking where they were supposed to go. Jin-sok snapped that if they disliked staying, they could go to the rooftop and be killed with Sungwoo. Jin-sok urged them to lower their voices, warning that their loud complaints endangered everyone. As the group continued to argue, Jin-sok lost his temper, cursing them for provoking his anger despite his efforts to remain calm since high school. He insulted them as dickheads, and accused Sungwoo of dying foolishly on the rooftop to show off. The group fell silent, looking behind Jin-sok. Sungwoo appeared, alive, standing behind 5 skeletons. Sungwoo challenged Jin-sok, asking if he had wished for his death. Jin-sok was startled and speechless. Sungwoo called him an eyesore and strode to the main door. Flinging it open smoothly after it had been immovable moments before. Turning to Jin-sok, Sungwoo demanded that if he had anything to say, he should come forward and say it. The lobby fell into a tense silence as everyone fixed their eyes on Sungwoo. Sungwoo taunted Jin-sok to speak up, but Jin-sok remained silent. Others muttered that Jin-sok had boasted of strength but was nothing. Jin-sok, now unusually calm despite their insults, said that if no one had anything to say, they should leave and watch their language in the future. He then turned and left the Humanities and Social Sciences building, followed by 5 skeletons who escorted him with wide intervals, checking their surroundings. Jisoo and Hanho were among the guards. Sungwoo noted the quiet and absence of threats. He told those inside the building that they were safe and to come out quietly. Students began emerging cautiously, with Jin-sok and Minsu following awkwardly, both looking depressed and pale. Sungwoo observed through the 4th-floor window that more than 10 goblins were grouped together somewhere on campus, clearly hiding. He noticed bodies of students killed by monsters scattered across the playground, parking lot, and woods, with fewer monster corpses. He reasoned that some people were adapting to the situation and, if alert, could defeat the goblins. Suddenly, Sungwoo spotted a group of about 20 people on the playground. Some noticed Sungwoo's party and waved. Most carried weapons, either from occupation cards or other means, indicating they had survived battles with goblins. As Sungwoo approached, Jin-sok, who had been silent, suddenly ran toward someone, pretending to know him, and greeted him warmly. The man had a heavy build and wore a student council jumper like Jin-sok, but what stood out was the chainmail armor visible beneath it. Carrying a long bayonet on his back, he appeared to have leveled up. Jin-sok ran to him, shouting that he had survived and expressing how lucky he was to meet him there, then hugged him enthusiastically. Despite Jin-sok's flattery and nonsense, the man seemed unaware of Jin-sok's usual behavior in the Humanities and Social Sciences building. Jin-sok leaned in and whispered something to the man with his hand around his back. The man then looked at Sungwoo and mentioned that Jin-sok was talking about him. Sungwoo noted that Jin-sok would not say anything good about him, yet the man approached calmly and introduced himself as Dae-sung Park, the student council president. He acknowledged that Sungwoo's group had likely endured much distress and claimed they had survived by defeating the monsters, pointing to about 20 armed students behind him. Dae-sung assured that Sungwoo's group would be safe if they stayed with them. The survivors from the Humanities and Social Sciences building mingled with the student council members. Dae-sung glanced warily at the skeletons surrounding Sungwoo. When Dae-sung asked what the monsters were, Sungwoo explained they came from the occupation card he had chosen. His tone was deliberately offensive and loud enough for those around to hear, attempting to portray Sungwoo as dangerous. Dae-sung then requested that if Sungwoo joined his group, he should destroy the monsters nearby. Sungwoo refused without hesitation. Dae-sung snorted derisively and gestured to his group, trying to leverage mob psychology to pressure Sungwoo. He asked if Sungwoo intended to keep the unidentified and disgusting monsters around them. Sungwoo began to respond but was interrupted by Hanho, who defended the monsters as cute. Jisoo quickly silenced Hanho. He then subtly displayed the chainmail under his jumper. Sungwoo laughed sarcastically, questioning how Dae-sung could describe the skeletons as sloppy monsters without knowing anything about them. He expressed distrust toward Dae-sung, recalling that he had recently been with a man who had said similar things. Sungwoo glanced at Jin-sok, who, though silent and dejected moments before, now bore his teeth angrily beside his master. Dae-sung declared that Sungwoo could not join his group but offered one last chance to reconsider, warning him to stay alert and think carefully. At that moment, Jisoo stepped forward and shouted that they had never said they wanted to join Dae-sung's group and criticized the student council's perceived self-importance. Jisoo denied it, questioning the relevance since the school was bankrupt, then insulted Dae-sung by name, accusing him of abusing his title. It became clear that Jisoo had long disliked Dae-sung. She demanded he stop being hypocritical, accusing him of siphoning millions by fabricating receipts with a stage setup company during the campus festival, and revealed that she had tipped off the school paper. Dae-sung tried to calm the situation but lost face as murmurs rose among the students. He sighed deeply and told them to leave, warning that the monsters would become agitated if disturbed further. Jisoo turned away first, followed by Sungwoo without regret. Hanho, though annoyed, also followed Sungwoo. Dae-sung shouted angrily after them, warning they would regret not standing together and mentioning the synergistic effect. He called them assholes as they left. The remaining students stayed with the student council members, unwilling to leave the larger group despite Sungwoo's reliability. Sungwoo asked Jisoo cautiously if she had a grudge against Dae-sung, recalling Dae-sung's earlier comment about her role. Jisoo confirmed her dislike, explaining that Dae-sung, a wealthy man, had been wandering campus to pick up women, betraying several female students who were her juniors. Despite his important title, she said his nature would never change. Hanho shouted that Dae-sung was a bad guy. Sungwoo and his party decided their first goal was to exit the campus and debated the best way to do so. Jisoo suggested avoiding crowded buildings where many monsters gathered, noting that the monsters seemed intent on killing humans. They agreed to avoid buildings and use the trail on the hill behind the campus, which led to the main gate and was less crowded in the morning. They headed to the hill, where an old wooden staircase and benches lined the quiet path. Although the hill was near the campus, the stillness was unsettling given the usual student population. While walking up the trail, Sungwoo suddenly stopped, and the skeletons ahead also halted. A light breeze passed over the hill. Sungwoo signaled for silence and pointed toward a shady area among the trees. There, signs of a recent fight were evident. Goblin bodies scattered with pools of blood and a large axe embedded in one goblin's head. A man who appeared to have won the battle drew his axe cautiously upon sensing human footsteps and turned toward Sungwoo's party. Startled, Hanho pulled out a dagger and exclaimed that the man was bigger than the boss goblin. The green-skinned orc, towering nearly 2 meters tall with fangs jutting from its mouth, lifted its axe high and roared, signaling the start of the fight as it charged blindly towards Sungwoo's party. Sungwoo drew his sword while the skeletons scattered in all directions. Sungwoo anticipated other monsters would appear, logically expecting orcs after the goblins. Facing the orc, however, he felt frozen, outmatched by the huge, muscular beast resembling a professional wrestler. Jisoo shouted for them to get out of there, prompting Sungwoo, Hanho, and the skeletons to retreat into the woods. The orc charged relentlessly, rooted briefly where they had stood, then rushed at them like a wild warrior. Hanho pushed through the woods, cursing the creature for its reckless charge simply because they locked eyes. The orc landed below the stairs, rested its axe on its shoulder, and blew its nose excitedly. Sungwoo warned that the orc was coming again as it climbed the wooden stairs with incredible speed. Jisoo, closest to the orc, drew her saber and boldly clashed with its axe. The clash rang out, and Jisoo collapsed to her knees, still holding her saber. The orc smiled faintly down at her, raising its axe blade toward her head, but a skeleton smashed between them, scattering pieces overhead. Sungwoo urged Jisoo to escape quickly, and she rolled aside just as the axe blade cut the wooden stairs in half. The one-armed skeleton advanced to confront the orc, drawing its sword and waddling down the stairs. The orc sneered at the skeleton, expecting an easy kill after massacring goblins. It struck hard, but the saber slid off as if hitting an oily wall, thanks to the one-armed warrior synergy effect. Losing balance, the orc stumbled. Sungwoo commanded the skeleton to kick the orc, and it pushed the orc's upper body with its short leg, causing the monster to fall down the stairs. The skeleton savored the moment of turning the tables. Sungwoo instructed Jisoo to climb up and move to a flat area, warning the stairs were a dangerous place to fight such a tall, resilient monster. Jisoo's right hand trembled from frustration, not fear, upset that she had collapsed despite blocking the attack. Sungwoo reminded them not to get too close and to kill the orc as they did with the boss monster while moving into the woods with the skeletons to block the orc's movement with obstacles. Jisoo caught her breath and followed him, recalling the crucial lesson that survival was not a competition. The giant orc climbed the stairs with big strides, spotting Sungwoo's party in the trees with a murderous glare. Sungwoo ordered the skeletons to sacrifice themselves first as planned. He glanced at the goblin bodies and noted he had enough mana to create more skeletons but decided not to waste it. The orc charged blindly, but Sungwoo's party ran deeper into the woods, dodging and weaving to render its attacks useless. The orc's heavy weight and huge axe made turning difficult. 5 skeletons appeared silently from behind trees and surrounded the orc. Manhwa shouted for an attack as the skeletons and his 3 daggers flew toward the orc simultaneously. Most attacks were blocked by the axe, but Manhwa's dagger pierced the orc's back. The orc flinched as 4 skeletons launched a furious barehanded assault, catching it off guard. The orc smashed one skeleton's skull and crushed another but grew heavier in its arms. 2 skeletons gripped its arms tightly. The orc tried to break free by grabbing their legs but could barely pull loose. At that moment, Sungwoo, Jisoo, and the one-armed skeleton coordinated their attack. The orc struggled to wield its axe, hindered by the skeletons clinging to its arms. Jisoo slashed its thigh with her saber, cutting deeply into its quadriceps and dealing a fatal blow. The orc collapsed onto one knee. Sungwoo seized the moment to cut off the orc's arm holding the axe with his sword. The one-armed skeleton then lunged, stabbing the orc's neck deeply. The orc's eyes darkened with a screech. Sungwoo received the notification. You have earned 110 gold by hunting the patrol leader orc. Jisoo dusted blood from her blade and noted the orc was tougher than ordinary ones but not as tough as the boss monster. Sungwoo prepared to resurrect the fallen orc, but was informed he could not summon a mid-sized monster due to his low level. He resurrected a goblin's body as a skeleton instead. Sungwoo suggested a brief rest, warning that if they encountered such monsters in large numbers, they should flee. While resting, he considered using bone weapon formation basic with the orc's body. He asked Jisoo which card she had chosen. She replied she was a tiger warrior and had selected the pink card with 3 stars, liking pink best after red. The tiger warrior was part of the regular army specializing in hunting beasts during the Chosen dynasty in ancient Korea. Sungwoo noted the cards featured a wide variety of occupations beyond typical fantasy roles. Manhwa then revealed he had chosen a 1-star card. After a brief rest, Sungwoo confirmed his mana had replenished to a certain level and stood before the orc's body. He murmured the words bone weapon formation, using all his remaining mana. The orc's skin and intestines turned to ash and dissipated, revealing a small menu before his eyes. The menu displayed options: bone weapon formation, basic, with choices including sword, lowest grade /6 swords, blunt weapon, low grade /5 blunt weapons, spear, lowest grade /2 spears, and arrow, lowest grade /4 arrows. Although the classification criteria were unclear, the weapon quality appeared to depend on the available weapon material. After a moment of thought, Sungwoo selected the blunt weapon option, which had a higher grade than the others. The orc's bones trembled, intertwining to form shapes, and soon 5 blunt weapons fell to the ground. Sungwoo expressed surprise that even those could serve as weapon material, and Manhwa confirmed it. Sungwoo picked up one of the blunt weapons, which the item information identified as an orc femur hammer, graded general and classified as a blunt weapon. Despite the skill's low grade, the weapon's performance was significantly better than the crude daggers used by goblins. Sungwoo then instructed Hanho to take one. The sound of rattling bones accompanied the action.